I've been really proud in many of the companies that I've worked in or advised, where you hear people talking about privacy without even you prompting them to do so, or you need to think about this when you're in a design meeting. To me, that's like, great, we've done our job because you're talking about it and I'm not having to step in and say, well, this is what we need to do. Opening that broader conversation, which isn't always led by the privacy team, is mission complete.
This is the Podcast, your privacy and data podcast, with me, Anthony Brown, interviewing leaders from across the industry to provide you with news, views, insight and opinion.
Hello, I'm Anthony Brown, and a very warm welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Gemma Witham. Gemma is the Group Privacy Officer at Skyscanner. I'm sure many of our listeners will know, especially those in the UK, but Skyscanner are a unique travel company that allow their users to search for flights, hotels and car hire, amongst other things, using their meta search engine. And boy, I'm sure most of you, certainly people living in the UK, are hoping that sometime soon you'll be able to hit the book button and get some flights or hotels booked. So Gemma's been on quite a journey since qualifying as a lawyer over a decade ago. And she's someone I describe as a 360 privacy leader. She has vast legal, compliance, risk and operational experience, and has a fantastic track record in building privacy, credibility and awareness, meaning to push the privacy discussion to the top of the table. And all of this in uniquely challenging businesses she's worked at. So that's why I'm really keen to explore this further with Gemma today, and part of the reason I wanted to get her on the show. So Gemma, hello and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm very happy to be here and explore this topic with you. Just to add to your introduction there, I'm going to be doing Skyscanner a disservice if I don't also say that we do some direct booking. So we're not just a meta search travel agent, but we also do some direct booking platform, which is quite interesting from a personal data perspective and kind of ownership of that data, which I'm sure we're going to explore through the podcast. But yeah, thank you.
Well, you learn something every day, so thank you for that.
That'll happen as well, of course.
So how are things, Gemma? I mean, it would be remiss of me to not ask you. You know, we're here, we're sat in the UK, it's the final furlong, we're all hoping, of what has been a very long journey. We're kind of towards the final furlong really of UK lockdown 3. So, you know, how are things for you and working at home?
I mean, I think pretty much the same as everyone else around the world. Slightly bored, a bit frustrated, slightly deflated. It's been completely different for me to spend this much time in one place, actually. Like my life before lockdown involved a lot of traveling, both for kind of from a work perspective and also for personal perspective. So yeah, being stuck in one place has been quite challenging, but I think also quite rewarding. I mean, I think, you know, we all know the challenges that come with having a fast-paced life. I think being able to stop and reflect and appreciate things differently has been rewarding in many ways. I think the extent of this lockdown now and the unknown of what we're facing into makes it quite hard to be grateful for it. But I do think when you look back in the future at this time, it's definitely a sort of pivotal time for change in everyone's life. I worked at home quite a lot anyway, given my kind of varied roles, or hotels from airports from different countries, whatever. So actually the sort of remote working thing for me, I'm kind of used to. It hasn't been so problematic. I think it's just the sort of mundaneness of day to day has been difficult. I also joined Skyscanner during lockdown. So joining a company where you meet people remotely has been very challenging, I think, because you can't just have those introductory chats over the water cooler or the coffee machine. You know, you have to be much more forceful to open doors and meet people. So that's something that has been very unique to me. Like, I think a lot of my career has been very sort of in, you know, obviously in face-to-face situations, but where I've really prided myself in actually developing those face-to-face relationships. So I've had to kind of unlock a new skill set there as well. So in summary, I think it seems worse than it is at the moment, and hopefully we'll look back and appreciate it more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you touched on really a topic or the basis actually for why I was very keen to talk to you. I thought it'd be really useful for our listeners to get some insight from a privacy leader around how you lead from the front, how you swim against the privacy tide, how you make things happen in businesses, because there's no doubt there's been a journey over the last few years in regards to privacy for any privacy leader. And I know as well, you've had some uniquely challenging roles. For example, you were at Wonga.com, who fairly infamous business in the UK. You were head of legal for their international business and head of privacy for them. Following that, you were group privacy officer at Tesco. So obviously an enormous role, I would imagine, multi-jurisdictional, huge global business. So, and then obviously, I think my understanding as well, perhaps you can tell us a bit more about it, but you then, prior to Skyscanner, you spent some time as a consultant, as a privacy consultant. You did a lot of flying, as you mentioned earlier, particularly over to the west coast of the US, and you worked with some really, really interesting businesses over there. Could you perhaps just kick us off briefly, Gemma, and tell us a bit more about your career and journey, and perhaps how you ended up specialising in privacy and why, really?
Yeah, sure. So I am a lawyer by training. I trained at Adelshaw Goddard, which at the time was just a national law firm. And I qualified into the commercial team. I did some paralegaling actually before I qualified in consumer credit. So I sat with the sort of financial services team at Adelshaw's. I then qualified into the commercial team. And I think in those days, they didn't want anybody to be necessarily a specialist, certainly at Adelshaw's. So we sort of qualified into commercial and did a bit of IT, IP and data. And I think, going back sort of 10 plus years, data was important, but it definitely didn't have this prioritization of area of specialism that it probably does now. And so I stayed there for a number of years and did a lot of secondments in the commercial department. You're primed to go out to secondments. I did a number of different secondments, and I think I sort of saw the light a little bit and thought, I actually enjoy being in-house. I enjoy kind of seeing things through and being part of a broader conversation. And so I was headhunted by Wonga, I think mostly because I had kind of consumer credit from my paralegaling days, commercial lawyer, and the data protection element, which is what I spent quite a lot of time when I was in the commercial team at Adelshaw's. I was kind of aligned to a partner there who specialised in data, so I naturally picked a lot up. So I went across to Wonga, and I kind of thought of it at the time as a secondment, like if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to Adelshaw's or I'll go to another law firm. I kind of thought, what have I got to lose here? I met the general counsel, who, at the time he was Lucy Vanel, and I massively respected her and thought I can learn from her. This is an interesting business. I think I was a bit naive. I don't think I really knew the extent of what I was going to be facing by going into that business junior mid-level associate. But it was probably the highlight of my career, I would say. I literally dealt with anything you could imagine as a lawyer. Like I'm not going to list all the things that were thrown at me, but honestly, anything you could imagine was thrown at me. Very interesting times. As the kind of business faced more regulatory scrutiny, I think it became more challenging to be a lawyer there. And I moved across to sort of doing a more compliance-based role and actually realised that wasn't really where my strengths were. I wanted to do a more broader kind of role within legal risk and compliance, not just the compliance role. So at that time, I moved across to Tesco, was really bought into sort of the amount of data that Tesco was processing. So my role was across the bank, across the mobile business, across the data analytics business. And actually, if you think about the richness of the data sets that they have, what the opportunity was, and actually how important it was to get those foundations in place to enable the business to utilize the data in kind of the ways that it wanted to. And I joined in 2015, so pre-GDPR, but given the nature of how big the organization was and the global application of it as well, we started work on the project pretty sort of soon after I joined, actually. So spent a long time working on a multi kind of jurisdictional, multi-business compliance program, which I really enjoyed, actually. I think I learned a lot from doing that compliance program. I think we've spoken about this before, Anthony, the things that I learned at Wonga, you don't necessarily appreciate you're picking up, but even sort of basic things like what does the risk committee do in relation to how do you get sort of sign off for a product? And then how do you apply that to the concept of a privacy risk committee if I'm having to sort of make some decisions across a multi-jurisdictional, multi sort of different types of companies at Tesco. So learn lots of things that I then took to Tesco. I think then I got to the stage in my career where I think many people do, and they're like, well, what next? I'm kind of group privacy officer at Tesco. Super interesting, but I feel like I want a bigger challenge still. I think I always want that next challenge. And so I decided actually I would set my own consulting business up. So I did that. Really, really enjoyed working for myself, but it comes with kind of pros and cons. So I think working for yourself gives you that kind of flexibility. It also obviously gives you uncertainty. And I think the reason that I went in-house in the first place was to really have a seat around the table when decisions are being made and being able to influence the business. I think as a consultant, I probably struggled with that lack of decision making. So I would, obviously give my opinion, but it wasn't necessarily as considered as if you were an in-house representative. And I think I found that probably not as rewarding as I thought it was going to be. So I then got approached by Skyscanner and really got bought into, this is all my exciting things that I like doing. I love the product. I love traveling. Yeah, they have a lot of data and there's some real opportunity here for me to add some value. So moved to Skyscanner July last year, 7 months later, here I am.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
And as we said earlier, fingers crossed, in the not too distant future, things are going to explode. I think everyone is going to be booking flights, booking holidays, booking hotels.
That is all part of our strategy. So fingers crossed. Otherwise, we might not all have jobs going forward. But yes, that is the plan. And how can travel not come back? It's such an important part of everyone's lives. I think it will come back. It's just, when does it come back, and in what shape and form does it come back? And things are going to change significantly. And it's just making sure that we're aware of what those changes might be, or we can kind of try and predict what those changes might be and try to keep on top of them. So it's very interesting times for sure.
Well, we're pretty remarkable as human beings, aren't we? We've all been on a journey over the last year or so, and we've somehow managed to break our lives down to the most simple form. And in the main, I know not everyone is the same. In the main, people, certainly that I'm speaking to on a professional level anyway, are remaining positive and have continued to do so. The most basic leisure activities have been taken away from us. And so many people love to travel, and it's awful. I mean, we mustn't think about it too much because we're going to go down the wrong path with the podcast here. But so obviously, as you've described, you've worked for a variety of businesses, fast growing, high growth businesses. You've worked for global powerhouses like Tesco. You've worked for yourself. You worked in multi-jurisdictional, across multiple jurisdictions, I should say. So just, I guess what I want to ask you about here, Gemma, is the privacy journey over the last few years. Let's say from when GDPR came in. What's your sense, having worked for a multitude of businesses, about how the privacy ethics discussion has changed within businesses? So the question is, has it changed really since GDPR? Have you seen a sea change?
Yes, I think it has changed since GDPR, but I don't think it's just GDPR that's changed how companies think about privacy these days. So I think there's a number of different reasons. I think individuals are much more aware of their rights these days, and that drives many more conversations. I think investors care a lot more about privacy as well, because I think it has that kind of reputational impact, as well as, of course, like fines and enforcement. But I think it's also, it's not just GDPR. I think it's legislation across the world that's driving all of these different conversations at different levels in all of these different countries. So I think, yes, it has changed, but I think it's just for a number of different reasons, not just because of the law. I think also data breaches are such high profile when they happen. And I think every company doesn't want to be the next victim of a data breach for many, many reasons. You see share price drops after data breaches happen. You see kind of the enforcement element really continue for a long time. Class actions are much more kind of prevalent these days, as we've seen off the back of a number of data breaches. I think GDPR has forced people, or have forced companies, to consider privacy a lot more. But I think it's much broader than just the legal reasons as well. Values of companies are much more prevalent and important these days, and a lot of them hang on trust. And the use of data is massively aligned to that trust. So I think if you've got a value-driven company that uses a lot of data, I think regardless of whether there's a law there, you have to do the right thing when it comes to the use of personal data, because people are so much more aware of their rights as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you throw in the mix at the moment some incredibly high-profile battles, I guess, are bubbling.
Yeah.
You've got Apple versus Facebook, the whole WhatsApp sort of debacle, if you like, over the last few weeks. And all these things are fantastic learning posts for the general population, aren't they? It's raising the privacy discussion as being highlighted. People are becoming more aware, and therefore that then impacts on all businesses, knowing that they have to be more conscious of this stuff.
I was just about to say, I think that is also for us as kind of privacy professionals, because the more that our leaders, our boards read about these kind of challenges within the press, like nobody wants to have their company's name associated with all of these kind of challenges, unless you can spin it to your benefit. But I think for sure it's important to kind of, the conversation's still going all the time, and we can use that to our benefit as well. So yeah, agreed completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And these external factors obviously now moving forward are going to make your life and your peers' life as CPOs, DPOs, etc. Hopefully a little bit easier when it comes to influencing at the top table in businesses. I know that, you've always struck me, Gemma, as somebody who just gets things done. And you've been successful in doing that. You've got a track record of changing privacy culture in organizations, building world-class programs. I'm thinking Tesco in particular there, and embedding privacy awareness, across all layers of a business. What, from your experiences, are best practice to really, where do you start with leading from the front, and how do you go about changing privacy culture when you start in a new role, when you join a new business?
Yeah, really good question. I think I've been asked this quite a lot. I think you have to get stuck in. So you literally have to go and meet people and show your value. I think show that you are a business partner, show that you're not just a compliance function, show that you can really enable, you're an enabler, you can support the business, you can highlight opportunities of how data can be used, maybe where previously they've thought, we can't do that from a privacy perspective. Well, why can't you? I think a lot of the time, I've had people in Skyscanner recently where I've met them for the first time, and they sort of start the conversation with, I'm sure you're going to say no. And I'm like, well, of course I'm going to say no if it's kind of in breach of the law, but what is it you want to do? And let's have a conversation to try and work out what we can do, rather than you assume I'm going to say no about things. So I think it's about relationship building for sure. And it's about, getting the business to trust you and get them to see you as a really valued partner, not just a compliance police or something like that. So in the days that we were able to travel, I really encourage my teams to kind of get on a plane and go and meet people face to face, because I think the value that you get then from that sort of building trust and building relationships is just, it's so important and so critical. Having to do that remotely means that you're, having to find out who those people are and have those conversations, but still equally important to keep that conversation going and really find out who the core people are in the business and just go and talk to them and get to know who they are and how they work. I think it's really about trust and showing that you can help the business, that you're there to help them. And actually, privacy is all about getting things right from the beginning. If we have a seat around the table at the beginning, we don't waste time designing a product or a process that is not in line with privacy requirements. And you don't want to come in at the end and say, well, you can't do that. Of course, we will do that if we need to, but it's better to have that seat at the table at the beginning and make sure that we're designing it in the right way. So I think it's about building relationships for sure, but being credible in how you're doing that. And also showing that you're practical in how you're applying the law. So of course, there's lots of laws that people will read about in the press. So all the sort of SHREM decisions recently and all the kind of international data transfer stuff, that's really labor intensive to do. And of course we have to do it, but let's find a way that's realistic for our business to do it, that ticks the compliance box, that addresses what we need to do, but doesn't do it in a overly scary way that we need to go and, recruit a big four and pay millions of pounds, which of course a company like Skyscanner is not going to have the money at the moment to do. So how can we mitigate that risk in a totally compliant way, but in a really proportionate way, and showing that you can add value in that way, I think, opens doors and then you sort of get more traction and the conversation is you're bought into a lot more. So.
And the seat at the top table, or the opportunity to talk at the top table, do you think it's much easier to get that airtime now perhaps than it was, say, when you joined Tesco, for example? Have you noticed a change? Yeah.
I think it depends on the company. So if you go into a company where they've had some form of, regulatory interaction before, then of course you're going to have much more open door. If you go into a company that's in a high growth stage, they probably are focusing on how we can grow the business, not how we can do it in a compliant way. So it's making sure that you can spot an opportunity to mitigate risk in the best way with your role, depending on kind of what stage that company's at or what experiences that company's gone through. But again, it's back to what I just said, it's being credible and being realistic and practical in how you comply with this area of law, I think will then just open more doors as well.
Yeah. So it's pretty clear. So the combination of skill set and as I described you as a 360 privacy leader, you've got all of those facets. You've got to throw in a huge amount of soft skills and communication skills as well to get that sort of buy-in, from the top table. just sort of on that note then, in the combination of skills that you've got, and it's pretty clear that you need this huge combination of skills now. How do you see your kind of role, or a CPO's role, evolving over the coming years? Do you think there's going to be more to add in the mix for you guys to do, or?
I don't think necessarily more in the mix, but I think more focus on, or more prioritization of what we do. So as businesses become more data driven, I think getting those foundations right are just going to be so important. Even if you think about in the last 3 to 5 years, I would say, I don't know, I'm just assuming, but I would assume that there's way more chief privacy officers, group privacy officers than there really ever have been. And I think historically, somebody would be given the data protection officer title and put in a maybe finance team in a very sort of junior level and not really have that kind of voice that they need to have to influence across the business. Like, I don't see that anymore. I see the role of the chief privacy officer as really having a seat around the table, really having that kind of influence on a business. I think that's just going to continue to evolve to have more importance going forward. I think in the same way that a chief data officer or chief information officer is kind of the norm in a sort of tech company, I do think that the role of the chief privacy officer is important, particularly where you want to do more innovative and more data focused uses of the data, I guess, or the business model is much more focused around data. So
I mean, I'd love to see a time, and in fact, I think we're getting there now, that when some of these hyper growth businesses, tech businesses, or fintech, health tech, all these sort of businesses, one of the first hires they make will be somebody who's a specialist in privacy, because the whole privacy by design piece, there's so much more aware now. These young fledgling businesses, they know they've got to build it into their product from the get-go. Otherwise, it's pointless making the products. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of time backtracking, rebuilding, all that sort of stuff. And I have to say, from my experience as well, specializing in this space as a headhunter for a number of years now, since about 2014, it's unrecognizable in many ways. The individuals that I was speaking to then typically sat in a compliance team, they're on their own, they didn't feel particularly loved. And then now, you invariably in a larger organization, of course, it's a standalone team, and it's growing. And within that team, you've got a CPO, you've got some technical individuals, you've got the operational, you've got the compliance, you've got a real variety of roles within the team.
Totally. Yeah, definitely. I mean, my team now at Skyscanner is obviously a lot smaller than it was at Tesco. And actually, we are all lawyers, but lawyers that have had, I've managed legal risk and compliance, like I've said before. So I kind of bring that experience. But at Tesco, I think lawyers were kind of in the minority in my team, actually. I had governance people, compliance specialists, risk specialists, program managers, project managers. I can't recommend enough how having a broad mix of specialisms within a privacy team is really critical to success. Like, there's so much to do sometimes that actually having that real risk specialist that can focus our efforts in exactly the right way to mitigate risk in the most effective way, and then being able to demonstrate that to the board or to the executive team that actually we're on this journey, but we're mitigating it in the right way. And this is why, and being able to show all the sort of KPIs around that is incredibly compelling. Again, to what I was saying earlier around being able to demonstrate that you're adding value, I think having that skill set is really key. Lawyers are not traditionally good at like compliance things. So like drafting a policy or designing some training, probably not all lawyers like core skills. Actually, as if a lawyer gives a compliance specialist the skeleton or the information that needs to go in a policy, and then the compliance specialist drafts the policy, prepares the training, it's much easier and it's inevitably going to be much more successful. So it's definitely privacy. I think having those cross-functional areas within a privacy team is always going to set you up for success.
Yeah. Do you think, is there a point where a CPO like yourself says it's mission complete, or it's infinite? Is it just infinite? In terms of doing a job, joining a new business, and then making the changes you need to.
I've been really proud in many of the companies that I've worked in or advised, where you hear people talking about privacy without even you prompting them to do so, or they're like, we need to think about this when you're in a design meeting. To me, that's like, great, we've kind of done our job because you're talking about it, and I'm not having to step in and say, well, this is what we need to do. So I think opening that kind of broader conversation, which isn't always led by the privacy team, I think is mission complete. Having a trusted brand, so having a company which is respected for doing the right thing when it comes to data is always important. From a kind of management information perspective, having, numbers that stack up against what you're saying. So for example, we comply with all our data subject rights in the right timeframes. We have low numbers of customer complaints when it comes to data. All these things I think show that the mission's complete. But I also think the business asking for like Gemma in the privacy team or Sarah in the privacy team to come to a meeting, not can I have privacy or can I have legal come to the meeting, so we're respected as actually adding value in broader ways rather than just being the lawyer that has to be in the room because we have to have a lawyer listening to it, I think is a really proud moment for me. But I think it is a continuing journey. If you think about what faces us over the next however many months, years, I mean, there's just going to be ever evolving legislation, guidance, codes. The whole of the technology sector is changing. The whole of the ad tech sector is changing. And, we have to keep abreast with all of that. Mission complete to a certain extent when people know who we are, see the value that we add and invite us to the table. But we're going to have to keep up that kind of relationship and that value add constantly because it's just so changing so much, I guess.
Yeah, and I think we're right at the beginning of the story of privacy, really, aren't we? I know privacy issues have been around in different guises, hundreds of years, or over 100 years, certainly. From a legal perspective, that is. But we're really in this age that we're living through now at the very start. I mean, the journey is exciting. It's overwhelming. There's so much for people to do. Final question for you, Gemma. That whizzed by, didn't it? What would you say you enjoy most about your role, about being a chief privacy officer?
I think it's the broad relevance of the role. So I think as a lawyer, being involved in all the different aspects of a business. So it is really rewarding and actually really interesting and keeps it interesting. So, we don't just advise the marketing team or the product team, we advise the employment team, we advise the data scientists, we advise the brand team, we advise the communications team, like everything has an element of privacy to it, really. So being able to kind of touch the broader business, I think is really interesting, particularly from a legal perspective. Being part of designing the strategy of the business as well has been really interesting. And I think the reason that I've certainly been around the table at Skyscanner when the new strategy has been discussed is really just because it's so driven by data. And so let's not have something in our strategy that is actually, we can't deliver because we haven't got the right foundations in place, or it's not possible at the moment. So having that kind of broad ability to influence is really interesting. I think also, it's quite new and exciting and dynamic and innovative, and all the kind of new technologies that are coming out in relation to whether that's, I don't know, ITP or how that works, or how we're going to look at AI. All of these things will require, that's how businesses need to progress to be successful. And we're going to have a really key influence or impact on how businesses implement that and engage with that. So yeah, I think it's just fast-paced, dynamic, it's never boring. Yeah, and so that's what I think makes my role really interesting.
Yeah, and I think my mind, I was just thinking, we're going to have a part 2 of this. I think we're going to have a second podcast, I think, in a few months' time, because it'll be fascinating, particularly the business you work for and the challenges you guys have faced. But obviously data is at the core of the business, and it'll be really fascinating to get you on again, and we can tell everyone, well, you can tell everyone how the journey's been. And I'm a Skyscanner user, so just hoping you guys pull through. I know you're in good shape. We're going to come through. It's all going to be positive. So it's been fascinating, Gemma. Thank you so much. I really hope our listeners take something away from this session. I'm sure they will. And as I said, we'll have a part 2. So it just leaves me to say thank you again. Tune in, subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. Do whatever you want, but definitely come back and watch another episode. Gemma Witham from Skyscanner, thank you so much. And well, we'll speak soon. Take care.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Take care. Bye.